we're going to start in a minute or two. We just let people finish their coffee for another second.
Actually, we should ask them. I mean, I don't see people heading for the doors, so maybe we could ask the people in the back to close the doors. Could anybody in the back please close the doors on your way out?
On that slide with the list of drafts, you can just say, does anybody want to talk about anything? But otherwise, we'll, for those expired ones, we can just say, if somebody wants to go to the mic and talk about them, we can do that. Yeah, but otherwise, we'll come back to them when everything else is done.
All righty then. Shall we? We are here for the HomeNet at IETF 100 as Ray is leaving us and Stephen and Barbara are taking over. Anyway, so those are, let's see. Stephen put together the slides and told me to talk to them, so I hope there's no surprises here. This is the agenda. Does anyone have a comment on the agenda? And so let's see, for minute taking, by the way, I think Tim and Michael Abramson is doing jabber. And thank you very much, gentlemen. That is much appreciated. Okay, so no comments on the agenda. Etherpad would be lovely, I think. I've become very used to it. There's the administrivia. And so here's status of various and sundry drafts. We do have the WGLC on the Babel profile. Terry, why are you there?
I'm here for one reason, and that's to, at the end of the administrivia, thank Ray for all of his efforts over the last many years for HomeNet as co-chair. I really appreciate it, and thank you very much for your efforts. If everyone doesn't realize, this is going to be Ray's last HomeNet session. After this, he will be officially stepping down. So if I could get everyone to say thank you to Ray in the usual manner, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate that. I would have remembered to thank Ray, but yeah, that was good. Okay. So we do have that. We have the HomeNet, simple HomeNet naming, which we just adopted as a working group draft in Prague. And then there is the HomeNet.14, which hopefully will be published at some point. And then there's all these expired drafts, which, since they're expired, there's presumably nothing to talk about. But if you have something to talk about, we can talk about it at the end if there's any time remaining, unless you really, really want to talk about it, in which case you should let us know. All righty. Oh, that's all the slides. That's all the chair slides, yes. Which then brings us to our first presenter, Jordi. I do believe you're up first.
Okay, so I somehow volunteered to work a little bit on this. I think it's about 10 slides. I am going to be, or try to be very, very quick with the slides, probably about 5 minutes, so we have more time for discussion, which I think is what we really need on this topic. Let me explain the history about how this come here. I submitted a draft in the IETF in Chicago for updating RFC 7084. My basic idea at that time was to include the new transition protocols because the actual document only supports 6RD and DS Lite. And we are needing in the market, we are needing support for IPv6 only mechanisms like MAP or 464XLAT and so on. So I really thought that we need to include them in the document. There was some discussion at that time. That document was adopted as a working group item, but then right before Prague, there was some pushback from the working group. And one of the things that I included in that document was supporting HNCP. Okay, so that's the reason we have this here. Basically, what happened is that after the Prague meeting, it seems we reached more or less a decision that we are not going to update RFC 7084, and instead of that, it's being suggested that we have a specific document for the new transition mechanism, which somehow will work in parallel with RFC 7084 for RFPs, RFQs, and so on. It's not moving. Okay, now. So this is what I think will happen. It will depend on the consensus on this week. And this document, which is RFC 7084-B-transition, actual version is 01. I am still calling it RFC 7084 just as a placeholder because we don't know if the working group adopts it, what will be the final name. But basically, this document no longer contains, as a should or must or anything like that, support for HNCP. And I have a single sentence that says what you have in the screen. So basically saying if you need support for multiple cascaded routers, you need to look into HNCP. Then I organized a panel in the IPNIC 44 in Taichung in September, so it was 2 months ago. In this panel, we got, I invited globally to all the C vendors that want to participate. Unfortunately, I got only 3 participants, which was good anyway, because we could not handle probably 8 or 10, but we got D-Link. I think this is not working very well. What is the presenter? Okay. Yeah.
It was a placebo.
Oh. Okay. So no battery. So we got D-Link, we got NAC, and we got Sixel. I think NAC was not able to make this meeting, but I think D-Link said, oh, I see Hans Liu over there. So probably if you have some questions, they can answer also, or he can answer directly. NAC promised to be in the Java or something, or participating remotely. In that panel, I included a specific question about HomeNet support, okay? If you want to read an article that I write in the IPNIC blog, including a video to the panel, you have the link, and it's about 1 hour video. I think it's quite interesting, but I am trying to summarize in this slide the main things related especially to HomeNet. First question is, there are Cs which IPv6 support that even if they have DHCPv6 prefix delegation, they are actually don't know or they don't do very well the allocation of /64 to different LANs inside the customer network. We know that, and it happens even for the guest SSID if you have a wireless network. So it works very well for IPv4 because they are doing that and so on, but for IPv6 they are not doing very well. Some do or allow downstream routers, but they don't have support for dynamic routing. And the main reason for that is to reduce the risk, and even because they are afraid of calls to the customer support center when you have that dynamic routing, right? Another question that we got in the panel was, maybe it's too early to have support or to implement HomeNet. Also, there were some considerations about how much is the cost. It seems that in regular CEs today, it's possible to do that. So it's not a consideration of we don't have enough hardware or we don't have enough memory or anything like that. The code is there, so that's not a problem. We know that in some open source like OpenWRT or LIDI, it has been implemented, so we know that. But we also discussed that there is maybe a market opportunity for this kind of technologies because there are different things happening, like the support for faster wireless, like Wi-Fi mesh, and that may be a good opportunity for HomeNet as well to be supported. There is also a good advantage there in the sense that the price that customers are paying for better wireless when they acquire their own CE or wireless access point or whatever is growing up. So it means also the margin for the vendors is going up. And the main issue that, according to the people in the panel we have right now, is when we have a network span across different HomeNet routers, the device discovery. Okay, so it seems that may be an issue that we need to resolve. Then I tried to compile some of the comments. I think I take all of them, so excuse me if I missed anything in the list. One of the inputs, and I think that was mine, it was, we have a missing opportunity for HomeNet if we don't go to B6 Ops and say, in the case that document for transition is adopted, because we are not going to modify RFC 7084, we are not actually asking the vendors to support devices including HomeNet, okay? Or we are not asking the ISPs to support those kind of devices. Another question was, if the HomeNet CE is behind the ISP CE, that's a situation which is not very fun. And then somebody said there are two possible models. One is friendly ISP model. The ISP has information about the HomeNet, including other external links. And then we have my home, my castle model, which is external links are considered by HNCP as untrusted, and the CE has no HomeNet topology information. We can use, in that case, the HCPv6 preface delegations to connect both kind of devices, so the ISP provided CE and the internal CEs, right? In the case of one, maybe the problem is a price problem. Is the ISP not willing to pay? And this is my own consideration, okay? So I am mixing here comments in the list with my own open questions to the group here. Or it's because ISPs don't understand that the deployment model for IPv6 is not the same as IPv4, because in IPv4 you have multiple NATs and it works and nothing happens, and never mind how the user is connecting the routers among them, it will work. But in IPv6, it's not going to work. So that's something that we need to consider. It may be a lack of information from the people that is deciding which CPE to acquire to provide to the customers. Somebody else commented that Model 2 is killing HomeNet. So maybe we need to think about that, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe actually it's Model 1, the one that is killing HomeNet. So there is a discussion that we need to have. Another input was, what do we want HomeNet to be? Okay, so we really need to take that decision, because depending on what we decide, we are going one way or the other, and maybe both of them are broken depending on how we tackle that. Some people use the ISP CEs as layer 2. And that's, for example, myself. I am using that. I get from whatever ISP the C, and I configure it in bridge mode and so on. But I'm not really sure how many people is doing that. It will work that if we have Model 1, right? There is some comment also that probably we believe people is not that smart and actually are smarter than what we think. If not, HomeNet will sort out automatically those problems. That was the main reason for HomeNet, right? So there is a question that I don't agree, and somebody said typically the CE is serviceable only by the ISP. And that's something that may be changed from country to country. I don't know, for example, in US or Canada, but I think in most of the European countries, the ISP provide the CE, but even for regulation, the user has the access to configure his CE. So that's also an interesting question. If not getting more common, it's not getting more common to have a dumb CE, such, for example, in GPON networks, you get the own ONT, and then you have the CE afterwards, which is basically what we said before about the layer 2 CE, right? If that's the case, the router that provides the ISP, which is the ONT, is the one that requires the HomeNet, right? So it's not the ONT, but the router behind the ONT. If you have multiple operators, you will use one of those routers only. So for example, I got 2 GPON links. Each link will have one ONT, and maybe both operators provide me a real CE, which HomeNet, I will use only one of them, or the other one I will use inside my home. But to connect both links, I will use only one. What about hybrid routers? For example, I have one main link, which is a GPON link, and this is also a question that come in the panel in Taichung. And then I may have other wired links, or maybe a backup, which LTE. Okay, so that's also something that we need to consider. Maybe it's HomeNet, I believe not, but that's an open question. Maybe HomeNet is only to be in retail routers, not the ones that provide the ISP, but the one that you buy in the supermarket. I really think that we are going to see in the next few years more and more people having multiple links or even multiple ISPs for many reasons. I am convinced about that, so that should be part of our discussion. And I think that's the last slide. One comment in the list I think is very relevant. Maybe what we need to document as a standard is something that supports both models, because we cannot depend on what the ISPs are going to do. And yeah, that was the last slide. So I hope this is useful for just starting the discussion, trying to collect all the inputs.
Ted Lemon. Thanks, Jordy. This is interesting. So when I've seen people talk about the ISP model versus the HomeNet router model, what I generally hear is that they want to actually just manage the HomeNet. So it's not really a HomeNet anymore. It's, HNCP isn't really necessary. It's all being done with management, OEM stuff. So to me, that doesn't seem, it's not necessarily wrong for us to talk about it, but it's not clear to me that it's really the same thing as a HomeNet. And aside from that, the other thing my other observation to this is just that we need to get working on actually having real HomeNet routers that we can demonstrate, because there's no point in talking about any of this stuff if it's all theoretical, and that's it feels like that's where we are right now.
Hans, maybe you want to comment something about what you did up to now for HomeNet at D-Link, or I don't know, I think taking the opportunity you are here, I think it's interesting to get the perspective from a vendor.
Hans Liu, D-Link. To be very honest, that we don't yet have any HomeNet deployment, and I know there are a lot of I know I can get open source from OpenWRT, from the works from Marks and Gentlemen's. However, the reason why we didn't actually put it later was because that somehow till today, we still have service codes talking about the very, very fundamental IPv6, like I mentioned in APNIC 44. Like even after so many years since 2011, yeah, when we first had the V6 day, World V6 day. Since then, we keep getting calls asking about questions one to another. So I think the overall reason why we didn't put it there is because I don't really see it is about time. Yep.
Michael Abrams. So I need to read up on that thread because I think those two cases are either too simplified or we need to qualify them more. I think there are more of these, and I'm not sure I would carve it this way from like what you need to make HomeNet work. So, and there is also in different countries, what the ISP is legally allowed to pull from the home gateway is very different. And especially now in Europe with GDPR, which changes everything I think all the ISP, this is a big talking point, but like, what can we even legally get from the home gateway, even if we are managing it? Even if we could get stuff, should we even have images that remove management capabilities? I mean, these are all the discussions. So I think that those 2 points it's less binary than that. And it's also I think with HomeNet generally, it was about getting a PD. So you were not running HNCP with the ISP upstream router. But I think here it's talking about then an ISP managed home gateway, right? Okay. So, right. So then you have the question of, can you trust that device? Okay. Yeah, because I think there are more deployment cases here in a way where we would need to discuss that.
Pierre Pfister from Cisco. So it seems to me that we have a chicken and egg problem for deployment. I mean, a kind of lack of incentive from vendors to put HomeNet in the routers. And I can understand that. Obviously, it's a burden to have possibly more bugs. So in France, my provider gives me a box. I don't really imagine changing that box. But I don't see why that box couldn't implement HomeNet. I don't see the collision between being managed and supporting HNCP. And in my opinion, option 2 is indeed killing HomeNet, in fact, because one of the main, I see two main use cases for HomeNet. I have 2 providers. Each provider give me 1 box. I want to plug the 2 boxes together and I want it to just work. So I need those 2 boxes. Not 1, the 2 of them to support HomeNet. And maybe it's different in other countries, I don't know, but in France, that's really how, and possibly in Europe, how I see it. The second use case is the Wi-Fi extension. Same thing. I don't want to make 1 Wi-Fi extension, I don't want to buy 3 routers. I don't want to have 1 CE router that is not running HNCP and then a first HNCP and then a second HNCP. I want to buy 1 extension and both of them should work with HNCP. So really, I don't see how vendors would ever deploy HNCP if it doesn't become a CE feature.
I think there is a question in the back. Mike.
Hi, this is Ran Atkinson. I think maybe there's a bit of a business model problem with the belief that any ISP is going to want to facilitate a residential customer using more than 1 upstream. Now, in certain geographies, there are regulatory requirements that may impede, but I think they really would prefer to have their own CPE and to have everything behind that, and part of it is that it reduces customer support telephone calls. And I'm told that in North America at the moment, it runs about $120 to pick up the phone and say hello. So that's more than the cost of the ISP service. So they really want to control the customer premise box. It's not that you can't get around that sometimes, depending on the provider, but they have no incentive to facilitate, no business incentive to facilitate a residential customer using more than one upstream at the same time.
Michael Abramson here again. So depending on what kind of residential gateway it is, if it's there are different organizations doing the standardization, Cable Labs, Broadband Forum, and so on. And if they are not talking about this at all, I think there is very little chance of getting this into volume mainstream that devices that ISPs buy and put in people's homes. And I've heard figures of you can put the user can put the modem, the DOCSIS modem in bridge mode and run their own devices. How many do this? Less than 1%. So if we want this as a volume product, it needs to go into the ISP managed device, because from what I can tell, more and more users, they just want a working service. They don't want to go to a store. They just want the ISP to send me something that works. I'll connect it, and everything should just work. ISP should just manage everything. That's what most users want, totally hands off. So saying, so for volume deployment, I think whatever we come up with needs to work in that mindset and framework.
However, I see more and more cases of people buying a secondary access point or router with wireless and so on, and that need to work.
Yes, it needs to work. Yes, so I fully want this to work, but it needs to be like whatever you go to the shop or you buy it from an electronics dealer and the ISP equipment, it needs to talk together. And I don't know, Barbara,
so that will be basically supporting
point of view. No, okay.
So Michael, that will be basically supported bot models, making such way that supports whatever is set up by the ISP.
Barbara Stark, AT&T, and I'm just here actually individually. I really would not recommend focusing at all on anything called an ISP model. I would only recommend focusing on something called an individual model. That is, a person's, or what did you call it? My home is my castle. The reason being, it's really very easy for an ISP to exploit things that are there. They don't need a whole lot of help in doing that. And personally, by the way, I do use my own router behind my ISP router because my home is my castle, and I have very intimate understanding of what that ISP router does. So there is this firewall between my home network and my ISP router, and I do want to make absolutely sure that use case is fully supported. But I also fully support making sure the ISP, for the people who don't know how to do what I do, can support them, because that is very necessary. And so, but anyway, I don't think IETF needs to specifically target the ISPs. I don't think that's your target audience. I think really the basic question is, how do we get the HomeNet suite of protocol solutions more widely known about and understood? And I think the killer use case is going to be mesh networking. The problem with mesh networking is right now it is, why do we buy that additional router, the second router? It's not because we want a second router. It's because I'm trying to get Wi-Fi further into my house. And there's some really interesting things going on at other organizations, which some of you are probably members of and may know about, but if you're not, we're not supposed to talk about it. But it is going on that I think will really get mesh networking to be more accessible to the common person. Because right now it's just like, I'm a gamer and I need my mesh, or something like that. And for the rest of us, or the common people, getting that second router installed is just so incredibly painful. But It really is. For common people, it's painful. But I think there's some things that are going on in the industry that will make it much easier to get that second router installed. And I think if there were a comprehensive recommendation of here's some things that we recommend in a multiple router topology, and it's a recommendation from the IETF, and it can come from HomeNet, that I think that might be useful. Might be. Can't predict the future. But that would be my recommendation of a way to go, is a HomeNet router recommendation.
And since Barbara abandoned the chair, I'm just going to cut the mic lines after Tim, sorry.
David Skenazy, Apple. So definitely mostly agree with Barbara. Just first off, I really wanted to disagree with Michael here. Well, I definitely agree that a lot of users, they just get the box that their ISP ships them, they plug it in, and then they forget about it. And that's fine. And that a lot of users are that way, and we want that to still work. My understanding of HomeNet is that I don't have the charter memorized, but the two problems we're trying to solve is one, multi-homing, and two, multi-routers. In that use case, HomeNet is completely useless. If you just get one box from the CP, we're not providing any value add. So there's no point in doing work for that use case. That's already solved, and that's been solved for over a decade.
Unless there is a simple way to put the ISP router in bridge mode.
There is no such thing.
I know.
The moment you've said the word bridge mode, you've lost. Like, that's not simple anymore. So in my mind, the power of HomeNet and what we're trying to solve here is that you have your ISP box and you go buy the second router and you plug it in, and now they play nicely together. Or you buy these three things, they just work. That's what we're trying to solve here. So this is the specific scenario that we're working on. And in that case, I, as a user, bought this second box, as Barbara was saying, because Wi-Fi was shitty in my bedroom, or because I got this second uplink. In both of those cases, there's really no incentive from the CP. So I really see like my home, my castle. Yeah, at the end of the day, the user bought this to solve a problem. They're the ones with the control and the incentive.
Okay.
So my point to the ISP router was, if I have a DOCSIS connection and a fiber to the home connection at the same time, it would be better if I can't put them in bridge mode, they need to participate in the HomeNet for this to work decently, right? So this was what I was saying about getting it into the ISP router. But I think it comes to, I will comment on to that email about this on the list and qualify what I meant.
Yeah, we can't always control. Tim Wasinski, and I think the home, the castle, I mean, Barbara's point is very true. We buy those second boxes to solve a problem, and 90% of us here have probably solved that problem, much like I solved recently with my brother. It's the mom problem, right? We buy stuff just to send to our parents just to fix their problems, right? I mean, come on, 90% of us here have probably done this recently, right? So when I see the HomeNet thing, I exactly see it for that, as that sort of solution, right? Yeah, I don't want to touch the ISP thing. I just want to send them something to make the whole world better, sort of thing, right? So absolutely. Okay, we're done.
So that's it. Thank you.
Just actually, I have a question for Jordi before you run away. Can you clarify the question you're asking the working group to answer? Because it's not entirely clear to me in a single question.
The question is, do we as a working group believe that we need to have some guidelines about how to deploy, or if we need to require HomeNet in all kind of routers, or only retail routers, or only ISP routers? I think that's basically the question.
Okay, well, maybe you can send that question to the list as a specific mail. Thanks. Ted?
Yeah, right?
Yeah, it does not.
Magically working. As soon as Ray figured out you just had to plug it in the USB, it was weird.
That's always helpful. Hi. Oh, look at this. I can actually read the slides. So I'm here to talk about simple HomeNet naming architecture. Document has been adopted by the working group. Stuart Cheshire has kindly agreed to join us as a co-author and has been contributing. Document's been clarified based on a bunch of comments that came up during the call for adoption. It seems like it's got sort of the outline of the document is probably complete, but it's not detailed enough. So I don't think that you could actually do an implementation just using the document as it stands. So it still needs some work. There are some open issues in the document. Oh, by the way, I mean, is anybody actually interested in this document, or am I speaking to? Okay, good. It's actually not a huge number, but it's better than nothing. Open issues. There's a fair amount of text in the document that I'm not convinced actually needs to be there. I'd be curious to know what people think about that if you've read it. There's stuff that talks about, like, what the state of the art is prior to this, which is interesting to us as working group people, but I'm not sure it's going to be interesting to a reader of the document. So that's the question there. We had a really good conversation on the mailing list about MPVD about 3 months ago. That has not yet been reflected in any new document. I'm not convinced that that belongs in this document. It may be that we actually need a special document for MPVD. And there are some issues with MPVD in the sense that we don't really have a way to configure it right now. But that's being worked on in the INT area working group. Let's see. Validating the updates. Wow. I have no idea why I wrote that. Oh, yeah. So in terms of the security model, there is no security. So one of the goals is to try and give us at least the degree of security that we have with multicast DNS, which is that you can't really do multicast DNS off the wire. So one of the things that's mentioned in the document but not yet detailed is how we detect that a response to an MDNS query actually came from the wire. That needs some work. Let's see. And then, as hopefully all of you know, we punted on DNSSEC validation, global names, and remote use. Those were in the larger document. We have something that we can work on right now. I have kind of a question about it, which is, it seemed like there was a ton of pushback on doing a fully functional naming architecture in various working group meetings in the past. And yet, when we decided to go with the simple architecture, a lot of disappointment was expressed by other people who didn't say anything when the controversy about how complicated it was came up. So I still don't actually feel like that issue is resolved. And I'm curious to know what people in the room think, and also, what people who aren't in the room think. And also, I don't actually know if the people who were against doing a more fully featured naming architecture actually had any interest in doing implementations anyway. So I'm not even. It's really very up in the air as to whether we're actually going down the right path. Obviously the document as written doesn't satisfy the HomeNet naming architecture, so that's a problem. That said, the document has some useful stuff in it. The document isn't a waste of time, because even if we do add more features, the basic features in the document are still features that we're going to want in the full system. So it'd be nice if we could do some implementations, if people could look at the document and see if they understand what the document says to do. It would also, of course, be helpful to get some feedback. So that's where it's at. That's my last slide. Comments, questions, criticisms? I'm kind of assuming that people have read the document if they're interested.
Do you want to ask that, Ted?
I hate putting people on the spot. Go ahead, Andrew.
My name's Andrew Sullivan. I have read this. And So first of all, I was one of the people who was complaining about the lowered expectation, but I think I also said on the list as well that if this is the expectation that we could actually realistically implement, then that's probably better than nothing. What I like about the current draft is that it just says it, right? It just says, well, yeah, we said we're going to do this, and then we're not going to do it, and that's too bad. And that's
Clarifying
fine.
point.
Uh-huh.
The fact that we're doing this doesn't mean we're not doing that. It just means that this is step one of 2 steps.
Well, that's actually what the draft says, right? It promises that there's some later draft that's going to come, and in fact, in the remarks that I was about to send, that before this I was going to send to the list, but I haven't gotten around to it yet because they're not polished. I think that's a bad idea, to be honest with you. To promise a later document that you haven't written yet seems like a bad idea. But the bigger worry that I have about the draft as it is you're quite right. There are some pretty significant gaps in the things that it proposes. Right, that there's, for instance, you mentioned DNSSEC just a moment ago, so I'm going to pick on it. Right, it says, well, that's beyond the scope, but here's the things you must do, and there's the 2119 must in there, and that's a pretty big hand wavy must. And I think that the working group, this isn't a criticism of the document authors. This is just a problem for the working group. We're either going to have to decide that there's stuff we're going to punt, and by punting, what I mean is we're just not going to do it, rather than having a specification that says, well, you have to do this stuff, but we're not going to tell you anything about how it works. Because that's actually the worst kind of specification, right? A specification that says you must do it, but everybody does it differently, means that it doesn't really interoperate at all. And the goal here is interoperation. So that's actually where my biggest worry about the gaps in the document are. But I'll send this in more detail to the list, but that's a sort of general point that I would make.
Mm-hmm. So, Andrew, I mean, do you, if by some miracle the working group were to turn around and say, "Gosh, we really want a full-featured HomeNet naming architecture," would you support that? Is that what you want?
Well, the problem in this working group has been that in the past we really wanted, for instance, routing things, and then we said, well, we want both, and then we spent like a year and change fighting about it. Mm-hmm. And what seems to me to be really important actually is to get things shipping. So I'm inclined to support lowered expectations that actually yield real results that people can live with, because I think there are some gnarly problems in let me step up even one more level of abstraction. Sorry to do it. What we're trying to do is make a protocol that really is designed for geeks, and it's got a bunch of assumptions about how that thing is going to be operated, the kind of environment it was going to be operated in. And we're trying to make that a totally no management required protocol that works just fine no matter what weird stuff you do in your network. Well, that's a pretty seriously hard problem, and I think that the chances that we will not succeed at doing it completely satisfactorily for everyone, they're pretty high. And the more ambition we have for this, the bigger the danger is. I guess maybe I was more hopeful when this all got started than I am now. But so yes, I'm willing to work on it, but at the same time, I'm keen to see some results and make some people happy.
So the frustrating thing for me is that actually I had pretty clear ideas for how to solve a lot of these problems in the original naming architecture document, and was told that nobody wanted to do them by a small minority of people, but nobody argued with that really. And so, for example, I mean, if you look at Acme solves the same kind of problem that we need to solve to make DNSSEC work. It's not that hard. It's been done. I don't think that's something we can't do. And so I don't actually buy that it's as hard a problem as people think it is. And my experience, working, so there's the best is the enemy of good enough attitude, and then there's the if you don't try to solve the problem, then you're actually going to wind up creating a thing that makes it harder for you to solve the problem. Here I'm trying to kind of ride the razor's edge between those two cases here where, like, on the one hand, I'm not actually totally closing off the possibility of really solving the problem, but at the same time, I'm not really solving the problem. And so, like, I don't think automatic DNSSEC delegation to a HomeNet router is something that would be so difficult to standardize this working group couldn't do it. The only question is whether the working group wants to do it.
So,
and by the way, doing that would solve a whole bunch of problems with the security architecture.
yeah, I agree with that. But like, I just want to point out that, like, you know, actual professionals who do this for a living mess up their DNSSEC all the time. So I'm not totally convinced that making it automatic is going to be easier.
But
I mean, maybe it is. But let me say something else. And let me just preface this by saying I don't think that this is not to try to cast aspersions on anyone. I think that the earlier effort that you made suffered a little bit from some of the timing of the drafts, right? So that it was very difficult for people to follow all of the drafts. The larger draft, there were some sketches in it of things that, like, it was pretty obvious you understood what you meant, but I'm not sure everybody else did. Yeah. And I think that that came up against just the fact of a certain amount of energy that had been sapped out of the working group because of other fights that had gone on. And that's an unfortunate fact, but it's the way the world is, right? Sometimes we just have to ship things. There are lots of things about the DNS that I wish were different, but we didn't manage to do it. I think that, I can think of some working groups that maybe we could have done a better job with causing some stuff to happen, and I bear some responsibility for that, but it didn't happen. And I think that this is an example where, I will try to send some text to try to improve some of the things that I'm concerned about here, but I really don't feel good about a document that says you must do this and it tells you nothing at all about how to do it. I think that way lies madness.
By this, are you talking about setting up a secure delegation or setting up a delegation or something else?
I mean, there's the secure delegation stuff. There's some stuff, for instance, in there about the registration for discovery processes and so on. And it says it's got to be on the local link, but of course we know that these networks are not only local link things. And then there's literally a parenthetical remark that says how. Well, we can't ship that. Right. We gotta actually have a thing.
No, that's one that I think definitely needs to be addressed. But the reason why,
and please just don't understand that as an attack. I'm just concerned about that general thrust.
The reason the text about delegation is in there is actually that Stuart mentioned, okay, great. We don't actually know, we haven't specified a mechanism for how to set up a DNS delegation, but it would be really stupid not to at least say that there ought to be some place in the UI where you can type in what the domain name of the net is and have that kind of work, right? So that's why that's there. But and I agree that it would be nice if it were more clearly specified, but I'm not sure how to do that without biting that whole apple, Speaking of apples.
Stuart Cheshire from Apple. Thanks, Ted, for inviting me to join you on this. My recollection of what happened is more or less aligned with what Andrew said. At the time you did the original work, there wasn't enthusiasm in the working group for tackling a complicated problem like that. So the working group guidance was, well, we'll support a simpler thing. And that's what the document is right now.
Yep.
And I think this serves a useful purpose because it shows, a simple thing may be too simple, but that helps to make it clear what are the gaps that we need to fill in. And that may not be the full generality of everything we originally imagined, but it hopefully there'll be guidance from the working group about this stuff is adequate and these are the gaps that need to be expanded a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Okay, so it looks like the line has died out, but I want to ask you, Ted, about your last item here, which says it would be helpful to have some working group participation in this work. What sort of participation would you like?
So it would be nice if there's anybody in the working group who's interested in implementing this stuff, if they would look at the document and see if they believe that they can implement it. And I think the answer will be no, and the comments that come out of that exercise will be useful. So that's the the main thing, actually. And then also, like, these questions that I asked, like in the previous slide, how do you feel about the text in the document? Like there's a ton of text about there's a ton of detailed explanatory text about why things are the way they are. And maybe that's good and maybe that's bad. Maybe we should just specify how to do things and not say why to do them in the same text. So, we could put that in an appendix. So if people are interested in why it's specified that way, they can find out. But maybe we should just say, do this. And that would be much less text to read and therefore would be much more likely to actually get implemented. So that's a question that I have. I mean, given that I wrote the text, I suppose I could just go and make that change, but I'm curious what people think. And so there was some feedback on the -01 version of the individual submission document. There hasn't been any feedback on the new version of the document, which, given when it happened, isn't surprising. But basically, that's what I'm asking for, is feedback on the new version of the document.
Okay. So certainly as chair, we can prompt people to please provide feedback on the document. Please provide some concrete recommendations of any changes that people would like to see. And please try to implement and provide feedback as to experiences implementing.
Can you go to the next slide, Ted? So am I right? Is that the plan you'd like to see followed is that you and others hopefully implement this, and when you get done with that, then you can finish the document and then we could publish it?
That's the idea.
Okay. And is it implicit in that if nobody implements it, at some point we say, well, we tried and it didn't get traction, or what's the fallback?
So I think this is really useful work in principle. But if nobody's interested in doing it, then it doesn't matter if it's not useful if nobody does it, right? Yeah. So, personally, what I'd like to see happen, and, I don't know how realistic this is to get full support for this in an open WRT distribution, maybe a fork distribution, or maybe it's an option that you can configure in the menus or something like that, so that people can actually install this and have it work, because right now you can't. I'm working on, Stuart and I in the hackathon did some coding on the MDNS stuff that we've been working on, which is mentioned in the document and which is being worked on sort of in the MDNS working group. It's not adopted yet, so it's not official, but so in principle that code could go into OpenWRT, and it would be nice if that wasn't the only place, because if it's just an OpenWRT and it doesn't exist anywhere else, then that doesn't give us much interoperability testing. So so that's if that doesn't happen, then I'd say we're hosed.
Okay, so I had one other question. It wasn't clear to me. I think you asked how many people were interested, but how many people have read this draft or the independence draft before that? So there's a couple additional. Okay, so about 8 or 9, I think.
2 of the hands up are authors.
Maybe while people are here, see if we can get people to commit to reviewing it.
Sure, good idea.
And then I can write names down in the minutes. How's that?
That would be good. That's a fine suggestion. How many people would be willing to review this draft and send comments to the list? And Tim, you need to look around, and I hope you recognize the names. I don't, or just keep your hand up. Don't take those hands down yet. I see Andrew at the back and Tommy. Okay.
Do we have Andrew way back there? Yep. Okay. Thank you, Andrew.
Great. Did you get Tomek?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so part 2 of the TED Show?
Part 2 of the TED Show, yep. Okay. So what's in this is kind of, there's a couple things. The bulk of this slideshow is actually what I think maybe should be in the HomeNet security document. Maybe the working group will agree with me. Maybe everybody will be bored. And we've actually done some work. So we actually have a Babel security document that's an individual submission. I announced it on the mailing list a while back, I think. I don't know if people have read it. Has anybody seen that document? Okay, well, we have one person who's seen it.
Sorry, David Skenazy. Clarifying question. Are you talking about the HMAC extension to Babel?
No, I'm talking about draft lemon. This is the one that certain people from an organization that apparently shall not be named actually wrote the text for, based on some email exchanges in which I was involved, and I'm officially the author, but hopefully that'll change soon.
All right, I'll have to look at it.
Yeah, you're one of the people who is on the CC list, so hopefully you know about it. So yeah, the document name is, let's see, draft dash. That's the one, Draft Lemon HomeNet Babel Security Latest. And it basically, well, actually, I have some text on it, so let's talk about that. We submitted a -0.0 version of the document in time for the IETF 100 deadline. It provides a mechanism for distinguishing between Babel routers, so you can trust some and not others. It identifies which server sent a packet. It works for multicast and unicast using public key for multicast and shared secret for unicast, and it relies on HNCP for trust establishment, which is an open problem. For multicast, we just sign the packet using elliptical curve. Hopefully there are fewer multicast than unicast packets, but that's something we talked about in previous sessions. So the shared secret for unicast is established just using DTLS. We don't invent a new method for doing that, but then the shared secret is just used to sign the packet. So it's not entirely DTLS. And the shared secrets are pairwise. So in other words, we don't share the secret across the entire network, because then it's not a secret. We use Diffie-Hellman to produce a secret that is shared by 2 hosts only. And that allows us to identify who sent a packet. The spec is actually pretty complete. I mean, it's probably not done, but I think that somebody who's reasonably knowledgeable about DTLS and ECDSA could probably do an implementation based on it. I guess the question is there any interest in working on this stuff? It's not clear to me whether it belongs here or in Babel. I mean, I guess it probably belongs in Babel, but this is a spec that's envisioned as being for use on the HomeNet. So I don't know if it would work in different environments. So I don't know do we have any Babel people here besides David? Okay. So yeah, anyway, now you know about it. Hi, David.
David, Babel person, apparently. I clearly think that, yeah, there's interest on this, and the bit of context that maybe not everyone in the room has is the Babel BIS RFC, which is moving Babels to the standards track, is getting close to last call, and there's a serious discussion about making it secure, because that was one of the parts of the charter of the working group. And so I think there's definitely interest in this. Yeah, maybe Babel is the place to do it, because some people have said, no, we can't publish standards track routing protocol without a security mechanism, and maybe this could be it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, maybe we should bring that up in Babel on
Yep, I'm
Thursday or Friday.
channeling Julius now, who I think definitely is a Babel person.
Yes.
So he's saying, I'm not sure that this coincides with the thinking of the Babel group.
Okay. Be nice to have a little more detail than that, but okay. All right. So, I mean, we right now the security of Babel on the HomeNet is essentially just, cross your fingers and hope. And personally, I don't think that that's a good idea. But if essentially nobody else in this room thinks that having a secure HomeNet matters, then I guess I can't really do anything about that. But that would be a very disappointing outcome, I think. And on to more detail about this. So we don't really have a HomeNet security architecture right now. I think we need to have one. And I think it needs to talk about a bunch of things. It needs to talk about this and by the way, this is all basically cribbed from a conversation that Stephen and a couple of other folks and I had about a month ago, I think. So the issues that we identified include how do we establish a perimeter, meaning which hosts are in or which routers are in the HomeNet and which routers are not. What kind of perimeter security we have. And, with a regular home network with IPv4 and NAT, you have perimeter security in the form of NAT, which isn't very secure, but nevertheless, it's harder to get through than nothing. And so then another issue we need to discuss is how we establish trust. So how do we figure out if a new router that's trying to join the HNCP network is allowed to join it or not? How do we secure DNS lookups? How do we protect service publication? So in other words, how do we avoid having a rogue device on the network claim to be providing a service that it's seen be provided in the past, and essentially, the usual sort of danger case for this is you're printing out your taxes, and somebody on the network notices that you're about to print out your taxes somehow and masquerades as your printer and gets your printout, and somehow that turns out to be bad for you. So, generally speaking, we would like it that when we publish the service, that some other device can't come along later and claim to be that same service, or either for denial of service purposes or to steal your data. And then also, most home nets or most home network routers have the ability to talk to a web UI. And right now, if you try to talk to that web UI, you have two options. Either you don't secure it at all, so now you have all of those packets, including passwords and things like that, going over the network in the clear. Or if you secure it with HTTPS, you get a security warning when you try to connect to it. So we don't really have a solution for that, as far as I know. It would be nice to have one. So these are things that I think ought to be in the document. The current thinking about perimeter establishment is that HNCP does it, and this is, this is something we've been talking about for years, right? It's not like this is new. It's just that this is something that probably ought to be in the document. So if we get a prefix delegation, the thing we got the prefix delegation from is not part of the HomeNet. If we are talking to an HNCP router, the HNCP router is part of the HomeNet unless it's not trusted, which, So, and then for the case of LLNs, where we probably aren't running HNCP on devices out on the LLN, low power lossy networks, we have a gateway, and the gateway is participating in the HNCP and on behalf of whatever devices are behind it. For perimeter security, firewall that mimics NAT behavior is sort of a starting point. The current state of the art on that, we have a document, RFC 6092, that talks about how that works. So another question to pursue is whether we need different behavior than that, and also whether RFC 6092 gives us enough information to implement perimeter security if we have multiple uplinks. And then, in addition, there's some work. The PCP working group produced some stuff that allows you to punch holes in firewalls in a programmatic way. That's kind of nice. It might be interesting to specify that needs to be supported. And also, MUD provides a way of saying what a device's sort of network activity profile should look like, and that can allow us both to block things that are not supposed to talk to it, and to enable things that are supposed to talk to it. So I think there's possibly a pony in there. Establishing trust. So we need some kind of keying mechanism, and we need to be able to figure out that a key is trusted. So the current thinking on that is that we publish public keys in HNCP, which will require an extension to HNCP. And then we have some kind of trust establishment ritual, like, sort of like, it could be Bluetooth style pairing where you punch in an ID number or a PIN to validate that you're talking to the right thing, or it could be, it could be something where you plug the two devices together using a wired network, and then you press a button or something, and that says, okay, you can trust what you're talking to on the other end of this wire. But we need to talk about how that works, and we had a conversation about that at the last IETF, but no work has been done on that since then. Securing DNS lookups, nice to use DNSSEC, but we don't have a way to do it, as discussed in the previous talk. We don't have a way to do a DNSSEC delegation that would allow us to have a trust anchor. So one option is to come up with a way to have a delegation that allows us to establish a trust anchor. And the other is to come up with some kind of hack to do trust on first use validation of trust anchors for the home.arpa on the theory that home.arpa can't have a trust anchor, and therefore there's no opportunity for there to be a conflict there. And then for protecting service publication, we actually have two ways to publish services on the HomeNet. One of them is using MDNS, and the other is using the DNSSD over DNS publication protocol, which Stuart's written up. So with MDNS, all we can really do is detect that the packet was actually sent on a local link, and so we need to be able to do that. For DNSSD over DNS, we can use the service registration mechanism that Stuart defined. And obviously we have to support MDNS for the long run because MDNS is not going away anytime soon. So we're always going to have, for the foreseeable future, we're going to have both of these. But obviously you get a lot more security if you do service registration than if you don't. So, and then how do we protect the web user interface, or do we do something else? We could have an API that apps talk to. If we have an API that apps talk to, then we can have some way of establishing trust using a ritual like I described earlier. However, if we use a web API, then we have to be able to get a PKI cert. We can use Acme to get a PKI cert if we have a global name, but we don't have a global name. The other way to do that would be TLSA with our Tofu trust anchor, but it doesn't seem to be supported in any browser that you're likely to be able to download. So again, that doesn't really help us. So that's kind of an open issue. If we had, it seems like a lot of things in the security of the HomeNet would be better if we could get a global name automatically. So that's why I'm so interested in that particular problem. So questions. Is there stuff that people know about, security issues that ought to be mentioned in this architecture that people know about that I didn't mention? And also, is there something in here that shouldn't be in here? Does anybody have any interest in commenting on that? Sounds like no. So, and then there's a whole pile of documents to write. So, I mean, I suppose one of the things to say about this is, as we were talking about in the HomeNet architecture, there's a ton of work to do here. And if nobody's interested in doing the work, and if nobody's interested in implementing the work, then there's no point in talking about it. But these are the things that I think need to be, or potentially need to be done in order to address the stuff that I just talked about in this slide deck. It's kind of a lot of documents. So does the working group, does the working group, I mean, I suppose the two questions here are, in principle, if somebody was going to work on this, does the working group think that this is a good idea? And then in practice, does anybody actually want to work on it?
There's those heads going down.
Or, Tomasinski, or should you talk to the Babel people and figure out where some of this should lie, at least on the Babel security stuff, right?
Well, Babel's an app. I mean, it's just one of the things on the HomeNet.
So then, never mind.
Yeah, I mean, if the Babel guys, that's been kind of an ongoing thing. The Babel guys seem to actually prefer that we just not do any security at all. And
no, not there.
It's a Babel working group now, so it's a consensus process as opposed to.
Sure.
Hi, Ted. Stuart Cheshire. Since you asked if there's support for this, I would love to see a way of interacting with things on the home network that gives you security without relying on the root PKI and a global domain name. There has been some interesting work in Firefox, in the developer edition, something they're calling Flyweb. I don't know where the name comes from, but as part of that effort, one of the things they're doing is identifying devices on your network, or I should say, identifying web servers you're talking to, not by the name or the address, but by other things like a hash of the public key. Because when you're configuring your home gateway, 192.168.0.1 is the same IP address in many different places, but it's not the same device. And when your web browser autofills your password, you've just sent the wrong password to the device you may not want to disclose it to. Until recently, all of these home devices were clear text HTTP. In the last couple of years, they seem to have got the message that security is important, so they're now running HTTPS, which means you get a certificate error. So now you have a secure connection to the imposter instead of a clear text connection. But it's kind of not their fault because there isn't a good way to do that.
Right.
Also, in the last couple of years, the browser vendors have got stricter. For many, many years, Safari, when there was a certificate error, it would give you a blue throbbing button saying, go ahead, click me. Now, they're much stricter. You've got to click through several things and actually type in your administrator password to allow access to this untrustworthy thing. So we've got ourselves in a situation that's not good at all.
Yeah,
And,
we're training users to violate their own security,
Yep.
basically.
David Skenazy, sorry, I had to jump up when you said Babel people don't want any security. So I definitely can't speak on behalf of all Babel people, but in my personal opinion, no, yes, we absolutely want security. Especially, like, in my opinion, HomeNet without security is just a non-starter. Like, this is 2017. It's just, it will never get deployed unless it has a decent security. What I was saying on the Babel mailing list was that the current Babel RFC is not necessarily the best place to mandate it, because the only way we'll get any kind of security is if we have a whole security architecture, and that includes the trust establishment.
Yep.
And maybe the trust establishment for the HomeNet isn't necessarily the same one as for all of the Babel use cases. So
Right.
my point was that's probably the part that needs to be done in HomeNet, not in Babel.
Yeah.
But I really think we need to secure Babel, and there are already ways to do that. The Babel chairs and everything can contradict me, but I think we may have an emerging consensus that DTLS could be, for example, a solution for that, thanks to things like unicast hellos. That's an option.
Channeling Julius again is saying Babel meeting is on Friday. I'm giving a security presentation.
So you might mention to Julius that there's been a proposal by the chairs to move Babel to Thursday afternoon, which would probably really suck
Okay,
for him.
He's listening, so he heard you.
Okay.
Terry Manderson, responsible AD. There is a milestone for perimeter security for HomeNet. If there is no security in HomeNet, you could probably consider this a non-starter. And I really, really desperately want to see HomeNet to be able to claim success. Security is a part of that success.
Thanks.
Barbara Stark. I do think security is really important. To that effect, we do have a breakfast on Wednesday morning where people are meeting at the IETF registration desk and going to find some place to go talk from 8 to 9. And if anybody wants to join, come join us Wednesday morning, 8 o'clock at the IETF registration desk, and we're going to try and have a little sit down and chat a little more about security. Another thing that I see on this security question is, number one, there is no certificate authority in the world, not VeriSign, not any other, that I trust to say whether or not something is trusted to be on my home network. Not a one of them. And so there is nothing that can come from above. Whatever trust that is going to be in the home network, it has to come from me, the home network owner. If it doesn't come from me, then I don't trust it. And so that's always been my problem with talking about, root CAs and things like that. If the root CA isn't me, it's not trusted.
Okay, so we're going to make HomeNet users run their own CA. Sorry, I had to say it.
You said it. So.
Right. Sorry, Andrew.
Well, we can chat about it. I mean, what's the difference between running your own CA or generating a curve key pair, right?
Yeah. Right.
Neither of those things make much sense to anybody out in the world.
Yeah, so this is Andrew Sullivan. The thing that I'm worried about is that we have, and this is the thing that has been the bugbear all along for this working group, right? We have a bunch of people in this room who are experimenting with these things, who have complicated stuff that they want to do, and we all go to our grandmother's houses apparently and fix that. But for shipping devices, none of those things are realistic, right? Anything that involves, step one, open box, step two, do something. This is not any longer a realistic thing, right? You just got to plug it in and it's got to work. And that's I think we've heard that many times at the microphone. So I'm really concerned about anything that says, well, it can't, I can't depend on this or that certificate authority or whatever. I think instead what we've got to do is set up the requirements the other way, along the lines of, you need to be able to do this advanced stuff if you want to be able to do it. We can't lock people out, but we've got to be able to make stuff easy enough, or this is going to be a failure in a different dimension.
So what I heard you saying is that we can address Barbara's use case, but that's not the default.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Yeah. But and maybe those are the questions. Maybe that's the prerequisite for the first document you had on your big list. Before you get to architecture document, maybe that's the document where we have some of these principles that we got to hammer out. And I hope it doesn't take us a year to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Irwin. So I think that it's looking at these bootstrap problems. It's basically impossible to achieve what Barbara said, and having just plug it in, it just works. I mean, there needs to be some step where you're blipping your phone with NFC and provisioning something on this thing in order to say I trust this. I mean, do we think that there is a magic way of doing this? I don't
think there is a single way. We talked about this last time, and I think that there are a number of ways of doing it. I can tell you some of them if you're interested, but I think it's, I was getting the sense that there were a lot of glazed over eyes during the previous presentation, and I think that might even get further into the glaze over zone.
But just basically, there needs to be a middle step. I mean, it's not going to be like just plug it in, it just works.
Right.
Because this auto trust doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is actually the easiest way to establish trust.
So if we can say, like, my phone is my certificate authority or something, and I'm now, magically waving a wand at your thingy there, and now you're part of my administration domain, and I want to administrate you. It's got to be something like that.
Yeah.
David Skenazy, Apple. Definitely agree with previous comments. I think it might be worth it for us to take a step back and agree on, at least if not a solution, requirements for the trust establishment. Because it's true, as per always, you can have security and you can have the best usability in the world, and it's hard to have both. And in this case, as simple as you just plug it in and you're done, there's no way in hell that there's not physically possible to make that secure, because then you could have something evil that just plugs in and just works. So it might be worth it for us to decide. My personal opinion is that if we have, someone said the word optional security, let's not waste our time on that. If it's optional, no one's going to use it, and it's just not worth anyone's time to standardize any of that. Let's make the user secure, and most of them aren't technical. And in that point, we don't necessarily need to standardize the specific minute details of what a solution is. But we could perhaps standardize that in order to add a device to a network, you need a pairing step where a device on the network hands a key to the new device. So that could be with an app on the phone, and as someone who works for a company that makes phones, that could be a good solution. But a lot of these routers are really cheap, and they probably don't support NFC or other things. One other possible solution, plugging in a wire, pressing a button, that's a solution. Another one you can do that came out of a conversation I had yesterday, you have one of the routers just have an LED blink with a certain pattern and have a user press a button on the other router at the same rhythm. That sounds a little ridiculous, but if it's a 20-second process and then you've exchanged enough bits that you have keys. But anyway, I think we can't make progress on a security architecture unless we have a trust model, because that's going to be the sticking point. The other parts aren't easy, far from it, but we'll figure those out.
Right. So did that sound like you were volunteering to help?
No.
Sorry, you didn't answer the question? You know, when somebody says we must do stuff, and yeah, it seems like
I can help.
Of which you speak.
Yeah, okay. I can help, but the main point is we should have a conversation here and on this particular topic. I can help try writing some stuff up, but as Ted was saying, this topic has had a problem of lack of engagement.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's coming for me out of this conversation is that it might be worth. I think there might be people in the IETF who are not aware that this conversation is occurring, who would be interested in it if they were aware of it. And so, one of my takeaways from this is that I'm probably going to go give a presentation just very similar to this one at the next Boston meetup, the next Boston IETF meetup, which has a bunch of security interested people who show up for it. And even if they're not personally interested in getting involved, they may actually tell their friends about it, because I personally think this is a really cool thing to be working on. Like it's a little discouraging to me when I get up here and talk about this, because I'm like really excited about this. Like I totally want to be working on this, and like I'm looking at the crowd and everybody's sort of like, when's Ted going to stop talking?
I think that's a great point. If anything, maybe try to get on the agenda of like the security open meeting, because just hearing oh yeah, we're just not going to secure this is going to freak them out so bad they might come out and help.
Good point. I think that's the end.
Okay. So it sounds like there is certain interest. I'm not sure that there was enough interest to go ahead and adopt today. Would that be accurate? Right, okay. I thought you put something. Oh, just the slides? Okay. Oh, right, okay.
I think the existing draft is one really for Babel, I think. The draft that Ted mentioned is really going to be a Babel thing or nothing, I guess, right?
Okay. So thank you very much, Ted. Apparently, Stephen has something to say at the microphone over there now. No. Okay. So again, I want to remind people who are interested in further discussing the security topic of HomeNet and also of Babel and all of this home networking stuff in general. And I think it also gets to the securing of your name, your DNS SD services, all that sort of thing. It's not just Babel. There is the meeting informal on Wednesday morning where we'll probably find a place. And I suggested maybe the meeting room where DNS SD is going to be right afterwards, because clearly there's some people who are going to be in DNS SD who are interested in this topic. And if there's nothing else, I think we're done. Thank you, everybody. It was a lot of fun. And thank you, Ray. Thank you.
Quick shameless plug. There is also a conversation about security of service discovery in DNS SD, which might be related. So show up for that too.
And of course, if we do meet in the DNS SD room beforehand, the people can just due to inertia, stay there.
That sounds like a great idea. Yeah.
You can kind of need to.
You applied the disk 3 onto 1.